All right, we're back again with the P-47. So, a couple things I'll talk about here. And, I talked a little bit in the last video, I think, about some of the things we still have to go back to the fuselage and do. And number one among those things we need to do is the back of the fuselage. You see from this illustration, the rudder carries through the bottom of the fuselage, which means roughly here we're going to be sawing through and cutting this piece off. And then what I'll come back and do with balsa is fill in both sides of that cut with balsa, just to make sure that these don't then become flimsy and press in, and so that we can complete the tail portion, the small tail end of the rudder, the lower rudder here. Same thing, clean up the inside of that with infilled balsa. And then this part, this whole piece will just be attached to the bottom of the main portion, the upper rudder, before it's attached to the fin, the tail vertical fin. Okay, so there's that. That needs to be done. Oh, and I did clean up, I don't know if we can get a look in there, but I cleaned up a little bit this area inside of the scoop, where the intake is that shoots air down into the supercharger. There was a little bit of a line showing underneath the main fairing, the diverter, that inside the cowling. So at the back of that, against the firewall, was another piece of balsa that I was using as a former for the sheet of birch ply that I used for the scoop itself, and that was showing up a little too much. So I just took a little bit of dark gray paint and swirled it around in there to cover that. Anyway, that's that. And so on the fuselage, that's a little bit of rework. Oh, the other item on the fuselage is the way the cooling fins, the cowl flaps they're called, or cowling flaps, cooling flaps, whatever you want to call them. So on that aspect of the build, those mount just ahead of the second former. This is former number one, this is former two. And again, you recall that I often talk about how Guillow and Dumas and most of the kit manufacturers, they don't put the firewall where it actually should be. In other words, they don't start the kit former one at the actual firewall, and this is no exception. This is not where the firewall is. It's actually closer to former two. So if Guillow were to have, I guess, replicated that, they would have made this piece much larger, had that been shaped as if it were the actual cowling. But that's not how the kit was done, and so it's on the builder to come back and try to make that look right. So in this illustration, they don't really show you how this actually looks here. What happens on the actual airframe is that where the firewall is, the fuselage comes forward to the firewall and then wraps. It goes down and rounds over onto that firewall, and then the flaps, the cooling flaps, when they lift up, you can see that rounding. And even when they're down on the photographs of the P-47, you can see that that's what's happening, is that's rounded down. If I get a pencil, it's more like this right here, and it's like that, all the way around this area. It wraps down onto the firewall. So to replicate that, what I was going to do is draw a pretty distinct line all the way around the airplane using a guide, probably just masking tape or piece of 020 styrene sheet, and just imagine a flexible plastic ruler or something like that. And we'll get a straight line going around. I'm sorry, it should be just inside of the former here, just on the cowling side of the former. So we draw that line all the way around, and then I would just take a round file and carefully make a groove that goes all the way around. What I guess I would probably initially do is do a little bit of sawing with a razor saw on the line, and then use that saw cut as a guide for the file. I don't want to cut all the way through this part of the fuselage. I don't want that nose to become fragile and be able to snap off. So what I'll probably have to do is we'll make the saw cut, we'll just minimally run the file around, and then probably fill it with white glue a little bit, not completely back to flush, but use the white glue to kind of balance it out and keep it strong. At least that's what I'm thinking. What I'm thinking I'm going to do. And in reality, what I probably need to do is make 2 of those channels. Yeah, because we'll need to make 2. And the one further forward, so there'd be one just outside of this line. There would have to then be one about the width of the cowling flaps, apart from that one, because what I'm planning on doing is just adhering this edge, the edge that would attach to the fuselage, adhering that to a length of solder in a pretty fine diameter, not a real thick one, but let's see, which solder would I probably use for that. Maybe this one. I don't know. Maybe this thickness of solder, and just run that along this line, the back line here, and then drop that solder line with the fairing glued to it, with the cowl flaps glued to it, and run that all the way around, laying flat against the fuselage, with the back end of it laying just over that secondary groove, that rearward groove that replicates the formation of the firewall where it mates to the fuselage. So, again, I'm talking this through, and I don't know if I guess some P-47 aficionados would have a better chance of knowing what I mean, but you'll see it, I guess, when we do it. And then again, I still have to finish out some of the detail in the cockpit, get the pilot painted and installed there, and get the centerline canopy rail installed. And again, I was just going to use this. I cut a slot into this box plastic extrusion, and cut a slot in the top of it. So this will be mounted obviously with the slot facing up, just under the canopy rail. It scooches from the right behind the seat there to an area just or maybe a 1/4 inch from the tail end of the canopy. And then on the cross member here, the bow here, there would be a drop down pin. So I'll just cut off a length of straight pin or something, and attach it to the center of the bow and drop it into this groove so that it appears to function as a guide. And it would keep the canopy from twisting and from sliding off, although the actual tabs should hold it pretty good, pretty straight. But this is just one more thing, and it's a scale aspect of the actual airplane that actually has that centerline guide rail, so we're going to replicate that. So on that bow that you might be able to see here, this is just a mock-up. So what I would probably do is take that out of there, trace it onto a piece of cardstock, maybe laminate 2 or 3 or even 4 sections of the cardstock, probably with holes punched in it. The actual, I think, canopy bow, this part here in the actual aircraft, it is lightened. It's weight reduction through having holes bored in it. So I'd probably replicate that with actual drilling through it. The birch ply can be tricky in a small piece like that to be drilling it out. It can split and crack and all that stuff. So I gotta be careful doing that. So we'll see how that goes. I can always just simulate the holes with black Sharpie and just draw the little circles on there in black. That's another option we could do. But anyway, I'm just, and then we need a gun sight in there, top of the panel. And that should, so those things, cut 2 grooves in the cowling for the cowl flaps, fix the center rail and add the centerline canopy rail, fabricate and attach the gun sight, and fix the lower rudder cut from the fuselage and create that lower rudder so that we're to scale on that. Going to the wings. So I've been working on this off and on. I needed to pick up a little bit more of the aluminum tubing I was using. So I had enough of that to get these parts done, but I did not have these larger 2 or 3 diameter lengths of the tubing in stock, so I had to go pick some of that up. So what we have here is approximately what it will look like. Now there'll be another collar like this here and another here, and then another larger sleeve over the very top of the rail of the landing gear leg. And the way it works, you can see these are just different diameters layered one on top of the other, all the way down to the piano wire diameter, and out to the scale, and then all the way out to the scale diameter in increasing lengths and diameter. So that's how we get the landing gear legs to try and we try to get them to look scale. This model will need quite a bit of work done on the main landing gear wells, and what I was planning on doing is using cardstock to line the inside of these once I have them shaped for sure how I want them, and then I can line them with the cardstock, including these channels here and the big openings here. Once they're lined with the cardstock, I can then detail them to look like the photographs and illustrations that I'm seeing about how this should look. And the other thing that getting the mock-up done, getting these sleeved at this point is going to help me do is figure out what depth this needs to be at for the landing gear legs, for the doors rather. So we can see the legs are in there pretty deep, and that's a straight shot. It's not tilted out or in. This is going straight back from the pivot point, which is a good thing. I was afraid that they were going to be cocked one way or the other. But so far the geometry is working, and the next thing I need to look at is that depth, and so I need to set that such that when the doors are applied to the landing gear legs, they're applied at the proper distance from the leg itself. So in other words, when I get the mounting hardware, which I'm just probably going to use loops of solder So these are just templates. These are going to be cut from the birch ply and then lined with balsa. The balsa liner inside will replicate the interior of the landing gear doors, and it'll also serve the purpose of fitting into the channel, so that there will be, the doors when these are closed will overlay slightly the channel on the surface, but inside here where the balsa is, where the doublers are, that component will fit inside of the channel. Okay, so I hope that you're following that. So then when these are extended, right, landing gears all the way down and locked, the doors aren't right up against these. There's a standoff between the landing gear leg and the landing gear door. So I have that leeway, and I need to figure out what that spacing is. And so, you know, obviously it needs to be closer than what we're seeing here. That's just too big of a gap. If I open this up and set this to where that gap is, we're probably out here. And that's probably a little too far. We need to be about there. So I need to take off probably a good 1/8 of an inch off of this middle surface. You know, we're focusing, as I'm sanding now, I'm focusing on the leading edge, getting this chamfer to a leading edge contour, getting the wingtip chamfer to get a nice consistent, you know, thickness out, or thinness out here on the wingtip, and then the trailing edge chamfer to get a nice sharp trailing edge. Once I have all those parameters set, then I'm going to begin sanding through here to set this depth, to make sure that I got a good gap for the mounting of the landing gear doors, such that when the gear's down, when the gear is up, the door will be sitting where it needs to be, flush with this deck, right? So that distance is proper, both in the open and in the you know, both in the down configuration, landing gear down, and in the landing gear up and closed configuration, right? So that's going to be a key thing to work on in the sanding process. The yet to come is getting these. And do keep in mind, I mean, I'm still going to be, you know, putting a